The following podcast is an exclusive presentation of Project Entertainment Network.
Thank you for coming to the Project Entertainment Network store. Please place your order. A good choice. A t-shirt for the horror show with Brian Keene. Amanda Method coffee mug. There's more. A Necrocast on hoodie. That's sharp. But why on earth would you want Bizong leggings? Wait, are you Mr. Frank? The Project Entertainment Network store, stacked with goodies from all your favorite podcasts. T-shirts, hoodies, mugs and more. www.projectentertainmentnetwork.com.
There shall come a podcast like no other. Defenders Dialogue with Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. Marvel Comics' original superhero non-team convenes once again. The Incredible Hulk, the Savage Submariner, the Master of the Mystic Arts, Doctor Strange, and a dynamic supporting cast of Marvel superheroes battle against evil as the Defenders. Without further ado, true believers, here's your hosts, Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. Excelsior!
And welcome back once again, true believers, to Defenders Dialogue. I'm Brian Keene.
And I am Christopher Golden. And I say Excelsior, Brian, especially today, because Champions Issue 11 really is the ultimate representation of the reason why we do this show.
I am so psyched to talk about this issue. As we've said on previous episodes, I did not get to read the Champions in its original incarnation back in the 70s. This is all new to me.
Yeah.
My newsstand did not carry the Champions. So while I knew who Ghost Rider was and I knew who Black Widow was, a lot of these other characters I only saw in Marvel Team Up or Marvel 2-in-1. But I got to tell you, Chris, this issue 11, feels like the classic Defenders. It feels like that 1970s Steve Gerber era Defenders.
Yes.
It's insane, and so many weird characters show up. It's also worth pointing out. Tell us about the creative team on this issue.
Well, it's scripted by the great Bill Mantlo and inked by Bob Layton, both of whom we had last time. But introducing the pulse-pounding pencils of John Byrne as artist.
That's right. Now, this was not his first Marvel work. His first Marvel work was actually a pinup for Foom, Marvel's old fan newsletter. And then he did a little 6-page horror short that got stuck in a shelf, stuck in a filing cabinet somewhere. And I think that was finally printed in maybe giant-sized chillers. It was used as, in one of the giant-sized books. But giant-sized Dracula.
This was his first sequential storytelling for Marvel, right?
Exactly, yeah. Before this, he'd done a lot of stuff for Charlton. And
right.
he'd done a little short sequential that got printed in giant-sized Dracula 5. But I think this issue of Champions actually came out before that. So this was, in fact, his first, unless you count the Foom pinup, his first published work at Marvel.
Yeah.
John Byrne, of course, would go on to be synonymous with the X-Men, with Fantastic Four. Many consider his long run on Fantastic Four second only to Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's originals. Then he went on to do great things at DC with Man of Steel and of course his own creator-owned books like Next Men at Dark Horse. It's really interesting to go back through this era and watch this. Brian, we don't talk about this on the show. This is a whole other podcast I should do about my obsession with Turner Classic Movies and the films that are shown there. But I feel the same way about this issue and about going back and doing this podcast that I feel when I go back and watch a lot of those films, which is you see things for the first time. You see actors
show up very early in their careers. You see, you see things that you weren't familiar with at the time or that didn't make an impression. And so to go back and see characters appear in earlier incarnations, or to see artists and writers show up early in their careers like this, I just think it's really cool. And it's one of the things I love about doing this show.
I agree.
But also back to the real reason we do the show, which is this issue being batshit crazy. And that's why when we talked about it, I want you to talk a little bit about the surveys you did. But when we have these conversations about which things to do when we're done with the Champions, in my mind, it's always like, what is the spirit of Defenders that that drew us to want to do that in the first place? And it is that sort of sense of lunacy and the idea that anyone can show up at any time and anything can happen.
Exactly. And that's what the audience seems to be leaning to as well. Now, you had mentioned I did 2 polls over in the Defenders Dialogue Twitter feed. If you've listened to the show a long time, then we did the entire run of the Defenders. Then we did the Gargoyle miniseries. Now we're doing Champions. After this comes Black Goliath, but that's only 5 issues.
Right.
So our listeners have spoken. Right now it's a tie between Man-Thing and Supervillain Team Up, and both of those are just as crazy as the Defenders were, and both have that sense of you never knew who would show up. Man-Thing isn't even the main character in his own series because he has no brain. He's just, a walking empath.
He does have a Twitter. He does have a Twitter, though.
Yeah, and Supervillain Team Up, it's ostensibly Namor from the Defenders,
right,
and Doctor Doom on the road together, like one of those old, Martin and Crosby movies, road movies. But everybody shows up in that book. In fact, the Champions will cross over with that book before we reach the end. Hitler shows up in that book. I mean, it's just insane.
Yeah, it's crazy. And that's what I love about it, is that it's nuts. And that's another reason why I definitely would like to do Marvel Team Up and Marvel 2-in-1 as we go forward, even though I know that those are long runs. And I think we want to intersperse them with short miniseries and things like that. But I just love this idea that, that we have these things in which anything can happen. The other thing, by the way, and I know this is a conversation we normally should have, not on the show, but Brian, I was able to get my hands on the new Marvel Horror Omnibus.
Yeah.
And
Charles Rutledge was tweeting about that. It looks great.
Yeah. I think that, we need to discuss covering the crazy shit that's in that book. But anyway, that's a conversation for another day.
All right.
Champions number 11, folks. Guest starring Black Goliath. And then, of course, there's an asterisk on the cover, and I love this cover. And let's see, who's done the cover here? It says Kane and Layton.
Yep.
So it's Gil Kane cover. And then the asterisk says, providing he lives that long. We open, the issue is called The Shadow from the Stars. We open with the Champions. I almost said the Defenders, Brian. We open with the Champions, 4 of them, in their new Champions car/ship. Much like the other superhero teams of this era, the Avengers had their Quinjet, the Fantastic Four had their Quinjets, and they also had that, what was that thing, Brian? The Fantastic
Car.
The Fantastic Car. Which separated into 4 individual
Spider-Man
components.
Yeah, even Spider-Man had a vehicle at this point in
the Spider-Mobile.
In the Bronze Age. Yeah,
Spider
exactly.
Buggy.
Remember that?
Yeah, that was fucking stupid, but it was really fun. That's because they wanted to have the toy.
That's all it was about.
When I was a kid, I loved the Spider Buggy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Bill Foster has helped create this thing. He's helped build their new Sky Car, they call it. But unfortunately, there's already a problem as the Sky Car is plunging toward their doom.
That's right. And Warren, aka the Angel, is kind of being a dick about it. As the controls are frozen and Black Widow is piloting the ship. By the way, we see Hercules, Iceman, Black Widow, and Angel.
Yes, and Brian, please read Hercules' dialogue balloon there.
By the hammering hooves of Chiron, I did distrust this fail craft from the start. But yeah, Angel's giving Natasha a hard time. Basically, he's doing everything but making jokes about a woman driver, as they're plunging to their death in this thing.
Yeah, somehow it's her fault that the thing is out of control, but she does manage to get it taken care of. The problem is that let's say the air brakes aren't working, so Angel basically bails on them. He's got wings. He flies away. Iceman even says, "Come back here, you coward." But Angel says he's not bailing out. He's going to warn Bill Foster, Dr. Bill Foster, who's standing on the roof, to get out of the way because they're about to smash into him.
That's right. Now, we should probably pause right here. If you've listened to the show for a long time, then Black Goliath is no stranger to you. He was, in fact, a Defender very briefly when Dollar Bill put out that ill-fated call for people to come and try out for the Defenders. He was in those 3 issues. There wasn't a lot of room
for character development in that story, though.
There wasn't. But, basically, this is a guy who was born in Watts in L.A., worked his way out of the ghetto. He became a biochemist. He was in charge of the R&D division for Tony Stark's Baltimore factory. So he was good friends with Tony. Later on, he goes on to be an assistant for Hank Pym, and working in conjunction with those two, he becomes the second giant man in the pages of the Avengers, and then he strikes out on his own as Black Goliath.
Yeah, I will say that my one issue with the costume is that in keeping with several other costumes of this era, most infamously Iron Fist's, he has that weird collar on his costume that basically is like the cone you put on a dog to keep it from gnawing itself. It basically limits his vision to about 90% of the potential 360 degrees.
Well, and we've talked on this show before about the quote unquote boob window that they would put on female characters' costumes in that era. Have you noticed they gave Black Goliath a boob window as well? But it's where his abs are.
Yeah, they gave him an ab window.
It's so bizarre.
Yeah, it is very interesting to me that the design of the costume. I mean, I don't hate it. Weird, which is weird to say, but I don't hate it. I'm sure Tom Snigoski will rag on it because he posted on Facebook the other day that the Nighthawk costume that we revere was, in his mind, the worst costume ever, which I think he's completely crazy.
Oh, he's insane.
But yeah, I don't hate this costume.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, and again, I'm going on about it because I have to say, I love this character. I was really disappointed. I was excited to see him show up in Ant-Man and the Wasp, but I was also really disappointed with what they did with him.
Played by Lawrence Fishburne.
Played by Lawrence Fishburne as Bill Foster. Yes. So go ahead.
Maybe we'll see more of him at some point. But anyway, yeah, he ends up saving everybody, and they're wondering who he is because, Iceman says, you're not the original Giant Man who I met back in X-Men issue 9 and Hercules. And here's an example of 70s comics. Hercules says, you're not Hank Pym or Clint Barton, because thy skin color doth mark thee as another.
There you go.
And Bill Foster, instead of saying, "What did you just say?" he says, "I think so," and then just blows it off.
Yeah. Well, but I love the fact that Hercules knows both Clint Barton and Hank Pym pretty well, and it's only the fact that Bill Foster is black. That's the only giveaway, that he's not one of these guys that Hercules knows pretty well.
Oh, shit.
I think like the next time I see Maurice, I'm going to say, weird, you don't look like Brian Keene. What? Anyway, that's 70s
Thy
Marvel,
skin
yes.
color doth mark you as another.
Anyway, so yeah, he's Black Goliath, LA's hardest to miss spanking new superhero, who also happens to be Tony Stark's West Coast rep. No applause, just throw money, which was like one of those lines that people said in those days. I don't know.
That's right. And at the same time, not only has Black Goliath shown up, but then the other latest Champions member lands on the rooftop, and that is, of course, Darkstar, who deserted her Soviet super agent task force in the last issue, in the last episode.
Yes, and she has defected from the Soviet Union to join the Champions in Los Angeles. Thanks to the intervention of Nick Fury, she's been able to do that, and now she's a member of the Champions. And she mentions that she's grateful from her heart. And Iceman says, speaking of hearts, because just like Iceman and Moondragon in the Defenders, which will come later, this is another example of Bobby Drake, Brian would say in retrospect, overcompensating.
Yep.
And it's Bobby sort of like lusting after the new arrival. Yeah, it's very much in keeping with what we've seen before. But then, Brian, as if it weren't enough to our joyful little Marvelite kid hearts to have Black Goliath, we have this next scene, and I'll let you take it.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, this harkens back to those classic issues of the Defenders, where all these bizarre, disparate characters would show up. Because we transitioned to Arizona, where Johnny Blaze, a.k.a. the Ghost Rider, is out just riding around in the desert. And all of a sudden, he comes across a stampede. He escapes the stampede. We don't need to get into all that. But
it's a damn cool scene, though. Come on.
All right. Well, yeah.
Come on. So Johnny Blaze is riding through this canyon in Arizona, and he hears thundering hooves, and he changes, as he does when he's in danger, or when there's danger afoot. He changes to the Ghost Rider, and then he sees what the danger is. It's a freaking stampede of bulls coming at him.
That's right.
He tips his bike and then has to create a fire cycle, a hell cycle, which he rides up the wall of the canyon to avoid the stampede. Folks, Brian's going to have to put this page on the YouTube channel because
I will.
Brian, I can't believe you're going to skip over that. That's like my favorite page in the issue.
I was going to skip over to the next page, which is my favorite page in the issue, because suddenly there's an explosion, and it's a purple arrow.
And we know whose trademark that is.
Yeah, whose trademark could that be? Now, not so much in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but in Bronze Age Marvel Comics, that, of course, means that Hawkeye must be near. Ghost Rider is approached by a bunch of cowboys, and they're wondering who this flame-headed weirdo is, and then Hawkeye appears, and he tells them, this is Ghost Rider. He's okay. Ghost Rider's like, what's going on here that the Avengers are involved? Hawkeye quickly explains that he's no longer a member of the Avengers. And then we meet Hawkeye's friend. And this was my favorite part of the issue. Because it's Matt Hawk, a.k.a. the Two-Gun Kid, an early Marvel 19th century superhero.
Yeah, this is the thing about, like, when I was a kid and I got to the Avengers story, in which the Avengers go back in time, meet the Two-Gun Kid, and then end up, in the Two-Gun comes back, and let me say this again: Two-Gun and Hawkeye become basically like blood brothers. They are buddies, like hard traveling heroes, Green Lantern, Green Arrow in that era. They're inseparable buddies. And so Two-Gun Kid comes back to the present day to hang out with Hawkeye. And then they sort of go off on their adventures. And this is one of the places that they show up. Not the only one, but one of the places that they show up together is in this issue. And I'm with you, Brian. I mean, I loved the sort of the buddy road comedy element of these two guys.
Absolutely. And I'm always a sucker for person out of time stories. Two Gun Kid, as Chris told you, he helps the Avengers fight Kang in the Old West. And then he decides, hey, I want to come see what the 20th century looks like. So he comes back with them. And yeah, he travels America with Hawkeye, just seeing everything. But the reason they're here is because these ranchers needed their help. There's a lot of strange things happening here in this canyon, which the locals call the Mesa of Lost Souls. And as Hawkeye is explaining this, something strange happens. A flying saucer appears.
Of course it does. Why not? When you've got Ghost Rider, Hawkeye, and the Two Gun Kid on a mesa at the Mesa of Lost Souls in Arizona, of course a flying saucer appears.
At this point, all you need is Nebulon and the Lubderdites or the Elf with a Gun to pop up, right. And it's an issue of Gerber's Defenders. I mean, it really...
Oh, my God. I just love this issue. All right, so we cut back to Champions headquarters where, for some reason, they don't have the proper equipment to hoist the Champions sky car in the air. So Hercules is holding it off the ground while Iceman ices up whatever Bill Foster, as Black Goliath, is welding. He's using some kind of laser to weld something in the engine, and Iceman is cooling it down. So there you go. And by the way, FYI, folks, in the era when this came out, this craft cost them $2 million.
Wonder what it would be now.
Well, they just announced that the changes in the design for the new Air Force One are an additional $2 billion. So yeah, there you go.
Right. So then we get a news broadcast in the background. It's showing the flying saucer and saying the National Guard are on their way. And there are three costumed heroes, only two of whom have been identified. And we see on the screen Ghost Rider, Hawkeye, and Two Gun Kid. And we come to find out from this news broadcast, the ranchers nearest the mesa have all been afflicted by some form of mania, savagely attacking people they've known all their lives as if controlled by some unknown force. So, Chris, there we have it. I didn't realize it until reading this issue, but my novel, The Complex, obviously I subconsciously got that idea. No, I didn't, because I didn't read Champions back in the day.
That's right. You didn't read Champions. But it just goes to show that the influence of the 1970s and 80s Marvel Comics is still with you in spirit, no matter what. I want to just say one thing about something we skipped, is that in that scene where they're repairing the Sky Car, the Black Widow and Darkstar are walking through the door, and we get thought balloons from Black Widow in which she's thinking, the others have accepted Darkstar without question. Perhaps it is that she is so like a younger Black Widow that causes me to worry. I hope her defection will be easier. I thought that was kind of interesting. I also
that's a nice character touch.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that, and then we get more thoughts later as when they go off to deal with the situation with Ghost Rider and Hawkeye and Two Gun Kid. She's thinking about Darkstar. Look at her. She's joined us without being asked. Why does she presume? Or is it that I, the Black Widow, feel threatened by a younger woman whose powers appear without limit? And so right. Black Widow is also thinking about what we discussed in our last episode, that Darkstar is the character whose powers have not been defined, so she can do anything we need her to do going forward, as we've seen in other issues of things like the Defenders.
That's right. We then go back to the Mesa of Lost Souls, where the ranchers are attacking each other. They're also attacking Hawkeye, Two Gun, and Ghost Rider. And then Two Gun notices something. there are shadows moving by themselves. The shadows seem to be bulletproof. So Hawkeye sends up a flare arrow, and the shadows are revealed as living creatures. They are the shadow soldiers of Warlord Ka.
And this was actually really cool because it reminds me of some kind of like Edgar Rice Burroughs or Robert E. Howard thing. In fact, the shadows moving toward this page in which the shadows are moving toward the ranchers, and when they get at the ranchers become possessed. So then the Ghost Rider is trying to use his flame to keep the shadow away from Two Gun Kid, and Hawkeye uses that flare arrow which drives the shadow soldiers of Warlord Ka out of the ranchers. It's just cool.
It is cool. It is cool. Now, if you are a Marvel Cinematic Universe fan, you've never heard of Warlord Ka, but I would wager that fully 75% of our audience who read this stuff growing up has never heard of Ka either. A very minor villain, shows up in an early issue of the Avengers and then once again in the Hulk, and that's it. But now the third appearance here in the Champions, basically Ka and his warriors have been here in the Mesa reforming. They've contacted their home world to send a rescue ship, which is what that flying saucer is. And now they are going to establish a beachhead for a final all-out invasion. Oh, and just in case that's not crazy enough, they've developed a new power, the power to possess human minds by inhabiting their shadows.
Exactly. And Ka will reign supreme. So once again, we have ordinary people, possessed by evil, which means that our heroes have to be very careful in combating them. They don't want to hurt them. So Darkstar uses her dark field to surround them, thinking, hell, this is made of shadow, basically. It'll hold them, but unfortunately, the shadow warriors walk right through it.
Yep, exactly.
And then Iceman is able to basically blot out the sun with a giant ice wall, which means that the characters can't be possessed, because if the Shadow Warriors can't get into your shadow, you're safe.
That's right. And Hercules is impressed. He says, "Thou hast struck upon a solution, young one. If yon beings cannot work their evil, lest there be light, then I shall keep them from the light by burying them beneath this mountain of stone."
Yeah, and then something very regrettable happens. One of the Shadow Warriors possesses Hercules while he's holding a giant mountain of stone. It's probably not a good thing.
Yeah, and Hercules decides he'll just drop that mountain on top of Black Widow.
Except that, fortunately, Black Widow appeals to Hercules and basically says, you won't just be dooming me, your friend, but the world as well, which might be over-dramatizing it. There are several thousand other superheroes in the Marvel Universe at this point. But in any case, Hercules does fight off the possession and throw the giant stone across the mesa. And then we cut to the ship, Brian, the spaceship.
That's right. Hawkeye, Angel, and Ghost Rider have a plan to take down this mothership. And it's a very convoluted plan. It begins with Ghost Rider gripping Hawkeye's arrow. That probably sounds way dirtier than I meant.
Next on Disney Plus.
Yeah, but he gives the arrow a touch of hellfire, causing it to glow with a light from which none may hope to hide.
There you go. Then the Angel gets possessed, and this is actually also a really cool scene.
It is.
Where he is trying to combat the possession by Ka himself. It's not just one of the Shadow Warriors. It's Ka himself possessing Angel, but Angel flies, and he just flies closer and closer to the sun, in a lovely Icarus metaphor. And Professor X had taught him to try to keep, taught all of the X-Men to try to keep psychic invasions out of his mind. And he is the avenging angel still. Ka, you've messed with the wrong champion. And he just keeps flying until what happens, Brian? His shadow disappears. It grows so small that Ka cannot, his life, as the life essence of Ka cannot be preserved, it says. There is a terrified shriek inside the angel's mind. Then Ka and his evil are gone.
That's right. So Angel comes rocketing back to Earth, but he's wiped out. This is really taxed him physically. He's got just enough strength to finish the job. He swoops down, picks up Hawkeye. There's a great line here where he says, "You'd better not miss, Avenger." And Hawkeye says, "X-Avenger, X-Man." I wish you people would remember that. Hawkeye fires the flaming Hellfire arrow into the mothership, and boom! What happens, Chris?
The brightness of the Hellfire and it is such that all of the Shadow Warriors are exterminated by the explosion, the resulting explosion of this spaceship. And before we get to the final page of this issue, I want to say kudos to Bill Mantlo, because I love that bit with the way that Angel destroys Ka. Because it's really, there are a million ways, crappy ways to end a comic book story like this, but this is an ending that completely fits the villains. It uses what we've established. It uses Angel's character really well. I mean, I really loved that as a way to resolve, instead of just finding some, Deus Ex Machina way. It really fits, and that was great. So kudos to Mantlo. And now on the last page, Brian.
Absolutely. So everything's over. The ranchers are thanking the champions. They're saying, "Well, we guess the army would have come eventually, but you got here first." And Black Widow, says, "Call if you ever need us again." Hawkeye and the Widow then abscond together because remember they have a relationship. So it's Two Gun bidding farewell to Iceman and Angel and Hercules and Ghost Rider. There's a good play there between Two Gun and Ghost Rider because this is the first time these two characters have met, and yet Two Gun was friends in the 19th century with the previous Ghost Rider. So it's a nice subtle touch there that was probably lost on a lot of readers.
Exactly.
But then Iceman interrupts, and what does he have, Chris?
Well, he has a call on the closed circuit from Goliath. I can't even believe I'm fucking saying this, Brian, but sorry to cut in, champions, but a girl just showed up here in deep trouble, scared half to death and carrying a box that was stolen from my lab a week ago. The box has started glowing, and she says the guy who's after her is... And then the villain who's after her smashes through the wall to threaten Black Goliath. And who is that villain, Brian?
It's the Stilt Man, fool. And he's already got the Z-Ray, and he senses there's enough power in the box the girl was carrying to make him master of the world.
So if it wasn't enough that we had Hawkeye and the Two Gun Kid and Black Goliath and the Warlord Ka and his Shadow Warriors and all of that and his flying saucer in this issue, we have the frequently associated with Daredevil villain, the Stilt Man.
That's right.
Who, if not an F-level villain in the Marvel Universe, is certainly a D-list villain in the Marvel Universe. Not their worst villain, but pretty fucking close.
The only time I ever thought Stiltman was effective was during Frank Miller's Daredevil run when Turk, the recurring 2-bit hood, that Miller would use for comedy relief, got his hands on the Stiltman costume. That was well played.
Yes.
That's a Stiltman I would read every month.
Yes.
But
and I will say that I think we went on so long about this issue that we probably should cut it short this week and be back next week with the next 2 issues, which are one story. But Brian, I will confess in advance that I will be mocking as much as I gave kudos to Bill Mantlo for this issue, I will be mocking the champions throughout the entire next episode for their inability to effectively deal with a guy in an armored stilt suit. You've got 7 fucking superheroes at this point, and you can't deal with one guy in an armored stilt suit where Daredevil, who has, his powers are not really...
he's a bat.
Yeah,
he's a bat.
Daredevil has done made short work of the Stilt Man many times, but you have 7 superheroes now with the champions who can't effectively deal with a guy in an armored stilt suit.
Exactly.
And there's and again, we'll get to it next episode, but there's a scene where the Stilt Man runs away. How do you not catch the guy in the armored stilt suit? He can't get away from you. All right. That and more.
Yeah, on next week's show. Before we let you go, folks, we just want to remind you right now, author Jim Moore, who's a dear friend of me and Chris's, he needs your help right now. He's fighting cancer, needs money for the bills because he can't write currently. If you go to GoFundMe and type in James A. Moore, you'll find a link to his GoFundMe. We also want you to, if you can, help out producer of my other podcast, The Horror Show with Brian Keene. That's Dave Thomas, also fighting cancer, and we have a GoFundMe for him as well. So easiest way to find them, just go to GoFundMe.com, type in Dave Thomas or James A. Moore. It'll take you right to their page. And, even if you can just give them $5, it will be appreciated, and it will definitely matter.
Yes.
So,
thank you, Brian.
Absolutely.
I think that Dave and Jim both are appreciative of all of the donations and the way that people have reached out to help them. And you're right, Jim is having, in addition to having massive amounts of chemotherapy and radiation, his radiation is going to be starting in a week or so. He's going to be having radiation 5 days a week for 7 weeks, and chemo continuing once a week during that period. So in addition to all of that, the amount of chemotherapy that he's had to have has given him sort of what they call chemo brain, which means, he's in great spirits, by the way, still. He's Jim. He's, and we, like last week, we went out to see It Chapter 2. So when he's not in the middle of chemo or radiation, he's capable of going to dinner, going to the movies, whatever. But he is looking more and more like what's his name, Walter White, except now he has no goatee either. But chemo brain basically means it's very difficult to concentrate. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to so for him to sit down and write at this point right now is very difficult.
Yep, and it's the same situation with Dave. Dave begins his treatment in 2 weeks, and they've already told him for the course of treatment he's getting, he can absolutely expect chemo brain. So we have somebody else stepping in to engineer the show for us. So yeah, both of them are in a situation where even though they have health insurance, they're going to be unable to work and therefore unable to pay their bills. So GoFundMe.com, James A. Moore, Dave Thomas. You know what they need, Chris? They need just the hardiest of Excelsiors that you can summon.
You know what? I am so glad you said that, Brian, because in that spirit, this is dedicated to Dave and Jim, and I say Excelsior, true believers.
We'll see you next week, folks, with the Stilt Man.
Well, shit, now they're not going to tune in, but okay. Stiltman and more on Defenders Dialogue.
Bye.
You're listening to American Top 40. More tragedy in the news today. Kim Kardashian has a new baby. What the hell? There's nothing good to listen to.
The price is wrong.
Hey, wait, what's this?
Anything moist. You gotta roll that out.
See, it makes me do weird things. I don't like it.
God damn it.
I'd be going down on myself.
Shit.
Hey guys, it's Bill
Mick.
Maya.
And Junior.
from the Unsupervised Podcast.
Check us out every Thursday on the Project Entertainment Network.
Take a break from the stress of the world and come have a laugh with or at us.
Bill.
My Favorite Story, a podcast author anthology featuring short fiction from the hosts of the Project Entertainment Network shows.
Three guys with beards. Jim Moore, Jonathan Maybury, and Chris Golden.
Tom Clark from Necrocast on
Brian Keene of The Horror Show. Chuck Buda. And Armand Rosamilia of the Mando Method.
Mary San Giovanni of Cosmic Shenanigans.
Jay Wilburn from Matters of Faith.
John Urban sick of ink stains.
Biz Zung's Mr. Frank.
Available on Kindle and in paperback and through the Project Entertainment Network store.
www.projectentertainmentnetwork.com.
This has been an exclusive presentation of the Project Entertainment Network.